You might be asking, why are we here? Just to give you a genesis of how we have come to the idea of having to bring experts to look at various issues that concern the police. You'd be aware that the African Union is continuing to build a tool they call the Africa Standby Force that will enable it to respond to conflicts. This is part of the efforts of strengthening the African peace and security architecture. It is in that regard, therefore, when the issues of multidimensionality of the ASF were spoken about, that we came to the realization that we need to have the components meeting as components so that they're able to look at the issues that concern themselves. In this regard, the expectation, therefore, is that these 3 or 4 days you'll spend your time looking at issues of training. How do we harmonize training amongst the various PCCs? How do we develop our standards? How do we conduct our pre-deployment? How do we look at issues of ensuring that whatever we do, even in the mission areas, there is a working relationship amongst all the components that are involved, the military, the police, including yourselves, and further defining the roles of the police in peace support operations. We're also expecting you to look at the different kinds of skill sets that are needed by the police. It has become very obvious in the operations that we've been running that although you would all be in the same area, you'll be in the same mission with other components, the skill sets that you might need as the police will be different, or will always be different from the other components. For example, it is very possible that the police component might have a need for mentors. The military might not necessarily need mentors. How do we, as the African Union, improve our guidelines to police contributing countries, thus directing them and assisting them in preparing the forces that have to be employed? You would be aware that as the African Union, just like the REX, we don't do force prep. Force preparation is done by the member states. We direct and assist in the preparation of the forces. However, we do force employment and we do force support when the forces are employed. It is therefore going to be very imperative that we get it right from day one. What types of skill sets do we need when we are developing missions? What standards need to be adhered to, and how are those harmonized? It is along those lines, therefore, that it was felt that we needed to have a formalized component meeting, and hence we call it the Police Support Strategic Group, which is meant to meet on an annual basis, and the discussions that come out of this August fora will go through to the African Police body that has been set up. It's called Afripol, and subsequently to the meeting of Ministers of Defense, Safety and Security for further endorsement, prior to it going to the Executive Council and then going to the heads of states and government of the African Union. Therefore, you are part of a policy process that we are undertaking as the African Union in order to ensure that we have the right police presence, we have the proper police that have been prepared for forces to be employed, and we understand where are we going. Because the ASF project has been ongoing for over 15 years, we now have reached the time where this thing needs to start to work. So we have gone beyond the issues of theories. We now need to start to say, how is it going to look like? How is it going to work? In this regard, we are therefore expecting you to look at the table of organization of equipment of the police, be it FPUs or IPOs. We are expecting that table of organization equipment to be costed. So we must, when we meet our meeting of ministers next year in May 2015, when we are telling them that the Africa Standby Force has reached operational capability, having been exercised through Amani Africa 2, how much it's going to cost them. They will want to know the overall cost of the ASF, but they will also want to know the cost of the police component. Is it 10 million? Is it 4 million? How much is it going to cost? The second issue, of course, as we had mentioned when we started, is the continuing definition of the role of the police. There continues to be discussions on this matter, but we need to acknowledge that there is no consensus necessarily between the police and the other components on the role of the police. Whether it is on the African Capacity for Immediate Response to Crisis, or the RDC as it is called, there seems to be no consensus as to what exactly will the police do if the RDC is being employed. Now, we can't let these discussions go on forever. There needs to be a stage where we clearly define the role of the police and saying this is what needs to happen. You are therefore called in by the African Union to assist in us getting there as we move the process forward. The third item, and we had already alluded this to, is mission management. We need, therefore, for you to advise us how to improve our management of missions, especially as the components of the police. What are those issues that we need to look into when we are setting up structures, when we are setting up systems and processes as strategic headquarters, directing mission headquarters on what will happen. Yes, we do acknowledge that the ASF might not be operational now, but the same challenges we face today, the ASF will face them tomorrow. Come 2015, the ASF is ready. It's not going to change. If we have a situation like we've had in our missions, where we have PCCs raising their hands and saying to the African Union, I have an FPU, and our standards is 140. Then they send us a 60-person FPU. No equipment, no training, no PDVs, nothing has been done. The impact then that has in the mission area. And when, of course, at a technical level, the PSOD refuses to recognize or to allow the employment of such forces, then the policy process, the political process kicks in. You are then forced to work with those components that are invariably become ineffective because they can't do patrols. They can't do anything because they don't have the equipment. What does this mean? What are the implications for this? We're therefore raising these matters because we are saying, and as we alluded to, the African Union and the RACs do not have these forces. We don't own these forces. These forces are owned by the member states. It has therefore become imperative that we need to start ask the question, what is it that we can do to assist our member states to bring up their forces up to standard? Just to give you another example, so that you can see the challenges that we're talking about. That's why we're saying we're gone past the issue of theory. Some member states, our own member states, do not make it compulsory for police officers to have a driving license. Now they get employed as police. Now we're going into a mission. In any mission area, you must have a driving license. Now what then is happening is that it begins to create standards, double standards, because we therefore will not generate forces from that particular country because they are not meeting our requirements. However, for them, they raise the issue of sovereignty, that it is their sovereign right as a member state to decide how or what requirements they will bring in for the police. So these are some of the issues that we need to start to look into seriously. That is why we're talking about harmonization, standardization, training, prior employment, and all those related issues. We're happy to note that even the United Nations has undertaken some efforts towards developing the issue of police and police guidelines, and we have been part of that process. We are therefore requesting yourselves that you should apply our minds into this matter so that we are able to develop a robust police force tomorrow that is going to be employed into the peace mission. Take into account, of course, the understanding that the African Standby Force is part of the bigger APSA, that is Africa Peace and Security Architecture, and then without it, there will be challenges in this regard. With those few words, once again, to welcome all of you and to declare the meeting of the maiden conference of the PSSG. I thank you.